With her achingly heart-wrenching songwriting, whimsical storytelling, and sweeping mezzo-soprano range, Natalie Merring of the gorgeously mystic folk outfit Weyes is one of the most intuitive indie songwriters making waves at the moment, along with her contemporaries like Mitski, Angel Olsen, Lucy Dacus, and several others. Weyes 2016 breakthrough album, Front Row Seat to Earth, helped propel her to indie darling status, capturing the essence of heartbreak with her melancholy songwriting that beautifully encompassed the vulnerable, oversharing aspects of confessional folk writing, with traces of Laurel Canyon soft rock legends like Joni Mitchell. She achieved even more notoriety with her 2019 apocalyptic folk record Titanic Rising, which made several year-end lists in publications like Pitchfork, Dazed, The Guardian, and NPR. Natalie Merring was born in Santa Monica and raised in a musical family in rural Pennsylvania. She grew up in a born-again Pentecostal household, and one of her earliest musical influences was her father, who played music in her local church, and had also played in a Los Angeles new wave band in the 70s and 80s. Merring eventually decided to leave the church when she realized that the restrictive teachings of dogmatic Christianity were causing her severe emotional distress. But she continues to cite the church as an extremely formative influence for her as a musician, which can be heard on the very choral, drone-like helicopter-y tracks like Some Winters. I grew up with church music, so sacred music and sacred space music, that was my favorite thing about music. Not so much content-wise, not so much the theory and concept of God, but just the idea that we've built this gigantic stone cathedral palace for people to sing in. And there's things acoustically going on more than what it would sound like if that person was just standing in a room singing. When I record, I think about sacred space. And I think about what would be the sound of your soul if there is music coming out of it. It would probably be in an echoey, strange chamber. Another inspiration that is incredibly palpable in her music throughout the way she weaves chords together largely comes from classic jazz records that were in heavy rotation in her household growing up. Merring started writing music as a teenager under the moniker Wiseblood, under the standard spelling Wiseblood, which was inspired by the Flannery O'Connor novel of the same name. Some of Merring's earliest musical influences, which are pretty unexpected when we think of the sound we now know her for, were post-punk and harsh noise bands like Wolf Eyes and Inca Ore.
It would be me, kind of playing acoustically with my nylon string guitar, and then I'd have Jim and my friend Jordan playing saws, like bowed, saw, which is just like a tool that you can bow and make strange sounds, like little tape recorders and little bells and whistles. It was very scratchy, sniffy kind of sound collage with this very earthy, folky stuff on top of it.
Merring cut her teeth playing in noise rock bands like Jackie O Motherfucker and Satanized. One of the first records she recorded as Wiseblood, The Outside Room, was a lot darker and more experimental, bordering on post-punk and classic goth rock, especially on the opening track, Storms That Breed. Her following record, The Innocents, blended her experimental noise roots with her folk sensibilities. As Merring's career started to progress with A Front Row Seat to Earth and Titanic Rising, she refined her sound and started leaning more into personal writing and dipped her toe into classic folk pop composition with softer, more accessible textures. Her gorgeous folk vocal leanings contain shades of Joni Mitchell, Patsy Cline, and Amy Mann. The way that Natalie uses her voice also has some shades of Karen Carpenter, although she has professed herself to be more of a fan of Sonic Youth's revisionist idea of Karen Carpenter rather than the actual Karen Carpenter. Explaining this change in sound in an interview, Merring said, "I think when I was a young woman, I was just kind of goth. I liked the macabre. I liked things that were dark and mysterious and noisy and lo-fi. I think that my message has gotten a little clearer as I get older, and as hope becomes more of an important commodity. This was a game changer for Weyes Blood, because an artist refining and simplifying their sound is extremely difficult to do without watering down the uniqueness of their individual work. Weyes Blood somehow managed to do this successfully, going on to release her most celebrated and well-rounded records to date. I wouldn't exactly say that less is more, but something very important to keep in mind is that adding heaps of experimental and avant-garde production to your songs doesn't automatically make it sound good without fantastic songwriting at the core. One of the best examples of this is when Kate Bush released Hounds of Love, immediately after she had released The Dreaming, a record where she explored the deepest recesses of boundary-pushing production. On Hounds of Love, she had a much clearer vision and idea of what she wanted to execute with those songs. The same can be applied to Weyes Blood. When asked what inspired her most recent album, Titanic Rising, Mehring described the record as the Kinks meets Enya. And no, that wasn't a cheeky, ironic one-liner about Enya. She genuinely has a lot of love and reverence for the Celtic New Age singer. In an interview with NME, Mehring said, "Enya is a very matriarchal musical force. Her music is very feminine, and she layers her voice a lot. It leaks into my music secretly on the side. There's a lot of lush layers of my voice hiding in the cracks. I think there hasn't really been much choral-influenced rock music, but Enya was the closest thing I could find to express both of our desires to reach into ancient realms. She records in castles and stuff. She's already in the ancient realm." Titanic Rising also delves into the personal and the political intersecting. On a track like Something to Believe In, Mehring illustrates how motivation to achieve greatness can be fleeting, causing individuals to spiral into existential madness and hopelessness. The song also explores the possible void that leaving the church may have left within her, and her search for some kind of meaning or purpose. She also explores the climate crisis and the struggle to love a burning society on Wild Time, as well as her intense distaste for classic big box office Hollywood films on the track Movies, and wishing for a signal from above to guide her forward in her life after losing a friend to suicide on Picture Me Better. One of the most supremely stunning highlights on the album is Andromeda. Staying true to her intuitive storytelling abilities, Mehring uses Greek mythology to deconstruct the initial stages of newfound attraction post-heartbreak. Andromeda was the celestial goddess who was tortured and chained to a rock to be devoured by a monster as a divine sacrifice. She was eventually saved by Perseus, who stoned the monster with Medusa's head. Mehring invokes Andromeda's name to channel her inner goddess energy in a distinctly human way, using Andromeda, a goddess who needed help, as an allegory for her own hesitance to let her guard down with a romantic partner after experiencing a harrowing ordeal of heartbreak. In an interview with Believer magazine, Mehring confessed, "True love in Andromeda is kind of like this abstract thing to a woman who has accumulated a lot of negative experiences, and maybe not had a lot of support otherwise, which is kind of like me, navigating in a predominantly male world for most of my 20s. There are a lot of wounds that a woman accumulates. That's really hard to bring into a relationship. That is a total relationship killer. It's a lot to ask of somebody, a man especially, to be like, can you please draw me out of my hardened shell and make me soft again?"
If you think you can save me, I dare you to try.
What all these tracks have in common is that she is not afraid to overshare or share vulnerability, and that is her greatest superpower. She is in touch with everything that makes her who she is, including the more flawed sides of human nature within her that not everybody is strong enough to recognize within themselves. In times of such despair in the modern world, with climate change, political and economic unrest, and even basic public health being at stake, we need that goddess energy. We need that maternal voice to soothe and guide us and give us hope. I can see why she loved Enya so much. And I hope that we are all able to collectively recognize just how lucky we are to have artists like Weyes, who have so graciously been willing to share their art with the world.